I graft a lot of trees in the spring, and during the winter months I'm trading scions across the country. I get a lot of stuff in from people, and I get a lot of scions that are something like this, where the bases of the scion or the whole thing sometimes are wrapped in a wet paper towel, so wet you can get water out of it. Sometimes there's even extra water in the bag kind of sloshing around in there and like in a Ziploc. And there's moisture, droplets of moisture in here. And I think that this type of storage betrays a lack of understanding about the problem of scion storage. And what I'd like to do today really is just talk about the problem of scion storage, try to define it a little bit, and talk about some of the factors involved so that we don't do things that we don't necessarily need to do or that put the scions at risk in the long run. So, what is the problem? The problem we're trying to solve is we have a scion here. I just cut this, and it contains a certain amount of moisture. It needs to keep that moisture, or at least enough of it, that it will last until I graft it onto a tree or a rootstock, the union heals, and then, and only then, it can start receiving sap and nutrients from the tree. So in the meantime, we need to keep moisture in it. So let's say I take this scion and just put it into a plain plastic bag. Okay, so it's going to lose a little water immediately because the air inside the bag is dry. However, if the bag is sealed, the air in the bag is very quickly going to reach 100% humidity. Pretty fast. These aren't going to lose that much until that happens. So at that point, drying slows or nearly stops. As long as the air, the 100% humidity air, is not getting out of the bag, or if it's warm enough, water can condense in droplets and make room for more moisture to leave and fill the air. But that doesn't happen in the refrigerator at all. So really, at that point, the problem is mostly solved. I also just got these in the mail from my friend Freddie, who's a seasoned fruit collector and has probably made, literally thousands upon thousands of grafts. And these had no standing water, no wet paper towel. They're just in a couple of newspaper bags, that keep your newspaper dry, that were tied off. And these are great. This is what I like to receive for the most part. When it comes to apples, pears, plums, and cherries, I'll usually just store them in a plastic bag like this, and I may take my fingers and dip them in water or run them under the tap and just flick them once in there, just like, a few drops of water to kind of raise the humidity right away and have just a little bit of water in there. But I often don't even do that. I'm also fairly sloppy about sealing my bags all the way, and I still get away with this all the time. So the first thing I do when I get scions like this is I unwrap them, toss the paper towel, lay them out to dry on my table, dry the bag out or get a different one, and then put them away. Again, I may just put in, flick in a few drops of water, but usually, or often rather, I don't even do that. So I think the logic behind, I think there's a couple things that people are thinking behind sending scions this way. One is that they probably get a lot of scions this way and really haven't questioned it. The others, I think, are the idea that if you have enough water here around the base, that it actually may wick up some water into the scion as the water from the scion is lost. Again, I think if you're in pretty much 100% humidity environment, the loss of moisture from the scions is very low, so I don't think that's really that valid. And I think the other one is just the idea, this kind of general idea that more is better. So, if the idea that like if you have more water in the bag, you'll have even less evaporation. But again, I just don't think that's true. Once you hit that 100% humidity, I think you're doing pretty good. So really, I think sending scions in the mail, you really should have very, very little, no standing water in the bag whatsoever, because when it's going from one refrigerator to the next across the country, which, by slow mail could take up to 6 or 7 days, then really you're just putting really wet scions in a warm environment, wrapped in something that's actually pretty good at growing mold. And I think that's the place more than ever in sending scions, which is often when people use the most water, that you should actually use the least water and just put them in a bag, wrap them nice and tight, make sure it's sealed up, and just mail the thing. Certain scions like peach, almond, and nectarine come to mind, dry out pretty easily, so you want to store those carefully. But in that case, you're usually grafting those pretty early, so just putting them in a plastic bag with a couple drops of water, as long as it's rolled up tight, is fine. If you need to store those longer, or maybe you want extra insurance for shipping them, or if you have something like these walnut and persimmon cuttings that won't be grafted until pretty late, like May. I've grafted walnuts as late as June, depending on what the tree's doing. And a good way to store those is just to put them in a plastic bag with some sawdust. So this is just damp sawdust. It's not wet, I can't wring water out of it, and just, a handful is actually enough. They don't need to be coated in this stuff. They're not really, it's not necessary that they're packed in sawdust. It's more that the sawdust is providing a reservoir of moisture to moderate the environment in the bag. So if the moisture in the bag were to drop below 100%, the sawdust would release moisture to bring it back up, and if it goes over, then it'll form droplets and the sawdust should absorb those. So that's basically how that works. But it also has antimicrobial properties, so that will help with the mold and bacterial growth. And it also is fluffy, so you have air traveling through here, and since it's not wet, that's better. So let's compare that to a piece of paper. So if I had this in the bag, if you can get it to be just damp enough, it can still have this kind of, like I said, reservoir effect, but it's not fluffy, and if you have a scion laying against it, that's connecting all the way like on an edge, then that area is not going to breathe, and the buds touching that could end up rotting. So to kind of summarize this, scions dry out. Putting scions in a bag brings the moisture in the bag up to 100% really quickly, and if there's no air leaving the bag, there's no moisture leaving the bag, then there's no moisture leaving the scion. At least that's the logic here. If you need a little insurance, a few drops of water or some damp sawdust is great. What you really want to avoid completely, always, is having standing water against the scion, whether that's just loose water in the bottom of the bag or if it's an item that's very, very wet. And of course that's fine in the short term, but in the long term you're asking for trouble, especially during shipping. If you think your scions are a little dry, just snip off the bases, like just maybe a 1/4 inch before you're going to graft, maybe the night before, and just soak them in 1 inch of water overnight, and they should plump back up pretty good. So I fully understand that there are very experienced orchardists and grafters out there who do use paper to store and ship their scions and have, it works for them. In the 20 or so years I've been doing this is just kind of the understanding that I've come to, and I just feel that especially using anything particularly wet is going to compromise your mission. It's just an unnecessary risk that you don't need to take, and paper definitely grows mold and stuff easier than sawdust too. I could say that as well. So if you have differing opinions, or you have a method that you think is especially convenient or superior in some way, I'm glad to hear it. I just wanted to do this video in the hopes that it'll result in me receiving fewer soggy scions in the mail.